Okay, let's just rip off the band-aid here. I really do like this update. A lot, actually. And it clearly shows because I'm not the only one. Like, there's triple, if not quadruple, the amount of people compared to what used to be the player count on the game. The game's already in way better of a state than what 0.1 could have ever delivered. And I am finding matches that can be more enjoyable than I ever had back in 0.1. But God, there are so many problems holding it back that I cannot, in good faith, say that this was a successful update. And all it really did is leave me with more concern and worry than it really did hope for the future of the game. Today, that's what I'm here to discuss. And I'm actually typing this rather than just rambling for 20 to 30 minutes with absolutely nothing but a notepad to go off of. I've seen a lot of videos currently that will talk about this issue, but they do it in a very emotionally weighted and sometimes distasteful way, rather than being critical, but also beneficial for the dev team to improve these issues down the line. Knowing how former conflicts have been handled as well, I'd like to not go down that path, because usually what that leads to is the game only worsening in the long run, as we've seen time and time again before. There will be timestamps listed both during the video and in the description to help you follow along. I really hope you enjoy this. Let's get started. Before joining the game, there's already quite a few things here that we can talk about. Most notably is the fact that the shop got a pretty decent overhaul. These include quite a few new quality of life things, like being able to access the shop while spectating, which was very needed, and being able to be pulled out of the round once the round starts, so that you're not skipped by being in the shop. New music has been added to bring more variety to the background music, while perusing the various items available for purchase, including multiple new ones that I actually really do enjoy for both the pre-existing and the newcomer characters. Seriously, Tito Amy is just so goofy. I love it so much. There's also the new shopkeeper, which, yeah, it's there. I do miss the main guy though, but I understand why. These changes are all actually really great. I love these. We're already adding new content to liven these out-of-game areas and just bring that extra life to the game since the game's launch. With that being said though, there are things I'm slightly critical of when it comes to other systems that should have been here. Despite being very obvious inclusions, they just aren't here. Why is there no timer in the shop? I'd actually really like to know when the round is going to start when I'm in the shop. It's in the main menu, but for some reason, it's not in the shop. But why? This effectively makes the timer useless outside the typical lobby area, which is also the least important area to be able to see the timer, compared to when I'm trying to adjust characters in the inventory or I'm trying to shop around. I'd like to know how much time I have to do these things. The fact that it's just not there, or it's obscured in some way if it is there and I haven't noticed it, is just really weird to me. Another huge issue, and I want to emphasize huge issue here, is once again a lack of notable character descriptions on the survivor end, even still. This is something that is incredibly unfriendly for anyone wanting to get into the game, and now we know there's a lot of people wanting to get into this game, but it requires external sources like fan-made wiki pages or talking in-game to learn about any of these characters. While many survivors can be pretty easy to pick up and it can be understood after just a game or two, that doesn't excuse the fact that you're going in completely blind on these characters if you just don't have access to these external means of help. And that further becomes an issue when you aren't able to play the character because someone else picked them, so now you aren't learning them at all. There are also survivors that do have complexity, do have nuance to them, and need this kind of character description. Amy has so many different playstyles that will not be understood if you don't know what the tarot cards do. Blaze's abilities change based on a meter, which can be incredibly confusing. Silver's moves having different effects based on how you land them or the meter you have. All these are great examples of characters who absolutely need this kind of information to be available in the game. The only reason I spend so much time talking about this too is because both new executioners got fully detailed descriptions on their pages in game. Do I think they're sufficient? No, not really. I think it's pretty awkward to read in the menu, and personally I just don't think they got fully proofread to make it understandable for the players to pick these characters up for the first time. But the fact that they are in game shows that it can be done, so it only furthers the fact that these survivors aren't getting them is just kind of weird, especially since this is a basic necessity of being able to understand the game. I'm also going to bring up the ranking system here really quick because it is basically determining how fast you unlock things in the shop. The ranking system now is unfortunately really scuffed and inconsistent, especially with the new characters. Many characters are incredibly difficult to get anything over a B rank with, especially if you aren't playing well for whatever reason. You have to play near flawlessly and very consistent in order to get anything over that B rank. Certain abilities are also not rewarded with a score at all, especially those that are very effective, like being able to push or set back executioners, meaning that if you're playing these characters that have these abilities, you're putting yourself at a really big disadvantage for earning enough score to get a proficient rank simply because you don't get scored for these types of abilities. Mix this with penalties when you're in your last life or when you're dying, and it creates a system that expects, like I said, near perfection and consistent teamwork from the entire team in order to secure good ranks, which is just honestly something that's not going to happen very often in a public lobby, especially with people who are just looking to have fun. Maps have definitely been one of the bigger talking points in the community for this update, and I really don't blame them. After all, half the maps in the current map pool are either going to be the brand new maps or the revamped map. So let's start with that revamped map, Green Hill. Compared to its old counterpart, this new iteration feels like a total 180 from what it used to be. Unfortunately, that's both in the good and in the bad sense of the term. The initial state the map is in when survivors load in is very bright and vibrant in its scenery, and this is super cool. It looks visually stunning for a game in this sort of genre. I want to really emphasize that. It is visually very pretty and very stunning. It looks very good for a location to play the game in. We finally get a map that looks really nice in digestible 30-second chunks before we return to the dull and dreary aesthetic. Yeah, that's kind of why I said initial state. After the first chase starts, the map loses all its color and goes back to the old look that lacks any interesting locations in favor of a very monochromatic color palette that this game's map philosophy really heavily relies on for some reason. I do want to stress this real quick. Having color palettes that lean in on certain color tones isn't a bad thing, and actually it should be used to invoke certain feelings into a map. The issue here is that they did this, but then they took it away in favor of having a very limited selection of colors that not only bleed through the entire map, but makes nothing distinct between the different areas or stands out at all. And it makes every location on the map feel too similar for one another. Another positive that I really do want to give the map designers credit for is that there's a lot more diversity in the layout of the map. As opposed to the open yet crowd design of the original map, where getting from one end to the map to the other end of the map was incredibly quick and made characters who relied on keeping distance nearly impossible, now these characters, at the very least, regardless of who you choose, you have the ability to play to their strengths, rather than having to do these very undesirable moves or play in very difficult areas of the map to get any sort of value. This was something especially with characters who are already really bad, like Tails or Cream, who are almost always fodder on this map because of very poor sightlines and very little means of escape. Now these characters are able to play effectively, but the rest of the survivors and the executioners also have their areas of the map where they can shine too. With all this said, I can't deny that this map is incredibly confusing with the new layout. After putting hours in this update, I still don't really know where some areas connect, and I can't immediately figure out where I'm going sometimes. Again, this is really because of the fact that most of these areas blend in with each other because of the way that the design of the map is and the color palette of the map. nothing is distinct enough to remember where they are right away, and so trying to navigate this map feels really bad. There's quite a few dead ends as well, especially in that new water hazard area, and it makes it so that certain executioners perform way, way better than others, but we'll get there. But, okay, what about the new maps, right? There's 2 new maps, so what about those? Do they carry anything similar? Well, okay, let's just break it. The best way I can describe these maps, and honestly most of the maps to an extent, but especially these maps, is that they follow what I call a quantity over quality sort of mentality. These maps are visually very impressive, and fitting the type of style that this game is going for and the themes that this game is going for, it does it really well. They invoke lots of dread, lots of despair. You have the raging fires of Angel Island that just rip apart the flora everywhere. And then you have the empty, echoing caves that are just too quiet for comfort. There's lots of interesting details here that really bring the map to life. When you're walking through destroyed temples, when you see the Master Emerald that's tipped over for some reason, and you have no idea why. You see the ash falling from the air while you're trying to escape at the end. Then in the caves you have vibrant crystals scattered everywhere. You have lots of jagged terrain fitting for the caves. You have water that belongs at the very bottom of the map and sounds really cool. Visually, these maps are pure eye candy for the players when they have a chance to immerse themselves in it. The biggest problem is that, kind of like I said before, this is all things that impact the quantity of the maps. But the actual quality of the gameplay on these maps is where the overall reception really dips, and almost instantly did so. There are constant performance issues I've noticed on these maps, like lots actually, and it leads to multiple scenarios of being damaged from really far away due to latency problems, or things that probably should have hit but just didn't. I'll get back to that one though. There's also general stutters on the maps that I've noticed, or general texture problems that you might see. There's also a lot of invisible walls. My god, the amount of invisible walls there are makes some maps unbearable to play on. There's also a lot of items that should not have collision that for some reason do, and just make very little sense. This is especially apparent if you're going to play characters that have very quick dash abilities like Sonic, like Metal, like Colossus. All these characters just have these extended period of time dashes, and when you collide into these very small objects, it's very blatant on these characters, and it happens a lot more commonly, and it leads to a lot of frustration, especially because to the average player, this would have been something that should have worked, but for some reason, between the invisible walls and the collision, it just doesn't, and it's really stupid. The other key issue is similar to the rework with Green Hill. There's just not a lot of good flow and direction these maps have. As I mentioned earlier, Green Hill's new iteration lacked a lot of these qualities, mostly because of the color palette, and also a lot of empty space or dead ends that makes navigation and distinction really difficult without a lot of time spent learning the map. This issue applies to the other 2 maps as well, sometimes even more so. Angel Island suffers from another very specific and very striking color palette that tries to amplify the aesthetics with warmer colors and a very heavy filter, but it makes sight very difficult. While this does fit thematically with the midst of the fire breaking out of control, it makes the gameplay feel very disjointed, it makes it difficult to navigate, especially in the middle of a chase when you're trying to find people to help you or find a new area to run to get a little bit more safety. But when all you can see is fire and lots of red, yeah, it doesn't work very well. The caves, meanwhile, have a little bit more distinction in colors and a little bit more sight, but the problem with the caves is that it suffers incredibly from that disjointed empty space, and because of the verticality to this map, falling down at any point can be incredibly punishing, because of the fact that making it back up is very difficult and takes a lot of time to do so. Again, when you mix this with lack of distinct landmarks and areas besides 1 or 2 at the bottom being the only places that might be recognizable, and also it falls into the recipe of poor gameplay because you're relying so much on team coordination and navigation in a map that doesn't have good coordination and navigation, yeah, this map also suffers pretty heavily from the current map design philosophy. Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. All these new map designs are visually very immersive. I'll give them credit for that. And to some degree, they do have good diversity in playstyles. Lots of interesting details, lots of good map geometry. But the problem is that the maps suffer from having a pretty harsh lack of quality control when it comes to how matches are being played out, favoring these solo chases with a constant sense of misdirection, which usually leads to frustration, over maps that favor coordination and map knowledge to allow you to make use of the space you're given. Again, it really boils down to just quantity in the details and immersion over the quality of the gameplay. No! Okay, time for the big guns. The main attraction, the magnum opus of this update. There are 4 characters added in this update, which you probably already know by now. 2 survivors and 2 executioners. I'm going to go over the survivors quickly first, simply due to the fact that I don't have nearly as much to say on them. Blaze is by far the best character to come out of the update, it's not even close, both from a design and a gameplay standpoint. Her kit is very impactful, having both stunning and utility capabilities, but they also adapt over time based on how well you're performing. With that said, none of the abilities are too overtuned relative to their uses, and do require good timing and playmaking to get value out of, rather than just being a free stun or pushing tool. Overall, she's incredibly well balanced, but still incredibly fun to play. I really enjoy her implementation here. Silver, on the other hand, is certainly a character to be added. The biggest thing that I think is holding a lot of people back from seeing that Silver is totally busted is the fact that there are a lot of quality of life things that make it hard to play as him. On the one hand, his flight passive speeds him up and gives him by far the best mobility tool in the game without any sort of competition whatsoever. His time travel move, when done right, completely ends chases on the spot, and the other 2 tools are insanely useful utility options that can easily sway the flow of a chase for the Executioner, and certainly not in the Executioner's favor. On the other hand, the flight button is bound to the spacebar for some reason, so it makes it so that jumps can be finicky and flight can be finicky. The time travel is cancelled from any ounce of damage, and the utility options have some of the worst hitboxes I think I've ever seen. He also comes with an extra 5 health, which is surprisingly helpful, especially against Colossus, but overall, Silver's just a really oddball character in the current space. But I think that once these quality of life changes come around, like reiterating on how flight is triggered or fixing some of the hitboxes, Silver will very easily be the best support and the best survivalist character by a literal landslide. Seriously, how did this get through testing? However, overall, somehow, the survivors are by far the better half of the characters added, which is frankly saying something when I'm saying that one of them is probably the best character in the game right now, almost on his own tier of gameplay. But I think you'll understand why in a second here, if you don't already happen to know why. So without further ado, let's get to the Executioners. Listen, I think this right here is what everybody was excited for, myself included, and unfortunately also what most players are disappointed about are the Executioners. Both of these characters, Colossus and Tripwire, did not receive enough time to thoroughly work out the core problems in their kits. At all. I think there are people to blame for this too, but I'm not going to go into that here. I'm really tired of seeing the whole testers didn't do enough, or what were the testers doing stuff. It's gotten old, guys. Let's stop. I do think that there should be accountability for some of these problems. 100%. I'm not saying that they should not get accountability for the release of them in their current state. It is unacceptable, honestly, that these killers are releasing in the states that they are, and that there wasn't any sort of input that we've publicly seen from the developers or the testers to at the very least take a look at some of these aspects of their kits. But I'm not gonna say that it's all of their faults either. There are things that happen. I'm not gonna keep my bias away from this point though. These 2 characters are, quite frankly, some of the worst designed killer gameplay kits I've ever seen for an asymmetrical horror game, only beaten by Dead by Daylight characters like Skull Merchant or Old Legion. This character is even on par with a character like PCX from Pillar Chase 2. It is that bad. Colossus was supposed to be the powerhouse, essentially. Lots of damage, lots of brute force. Typically, when you think of this sort of character, you think, yeah, very high damage and very heavy impact, but having very heavy movement at the same time, making a character who deals lots of damage, but is punished very heavily if you miss your abilities. So, what's funny is instead what we got is all the heavy impact, but completely missing that part back there of having punishment for missing your attacks. Colossus has moves that do deal insane amounts of damage. In fact, your basic attack can kill survivors in 2 hits. What the hell? But somehow, they also made it so that he has insane movement that is so viable, so dynamic, has no punishment whatsoever, with a hitbox that is so large that you can kidnap people from around corners and continue to run in the direction you are going, or do total 180s with almost 0 punishment. But let's add on to this, it's nearly silent in some cases, so any sort of auditory reaction to this ability by trying to listen for him and be ready for it is nearly useless. This is not a good ability. This isn't fun at all. This does nothing to make me have fun and engage with this character. But guess what? They went further with this, and also added both a near instant grab that deals very large damage, and ragdoll survivors long enough to get a free hit on them if performed right, but also a free indicator of where every survivor on the map is with a massive range, so that one of the only truly effective playstyles against Colossus of trying to keep your distance and stay out of sight is completely nullified. This is not fun at all. This just makes a character strong because the previous one was a glorified punching bag, rather than trying to make a character with proper strengths and weaknesses and be fun to play both as and against. The only ability in its current state that feels okay is the block. That's literally it. Everything else is so forgiving for the player playing Colossus that it makes anyone even remotely competent with the character clean house on lobbies with nearly 0 punishment. And yet, with that said, there's also somehow so much general jank to this character. I already mentioned that the charge hitbox is just stupid large for no reason, but the basic hit can also be either extremely massive or literally inside Colossus, so you can't even hit anybody. I've had this happen on multiple occasions. There's also the passive, where you climb walls, that just doesn't work sometimes on some surfaces. Even if you had a perfectly flat wall, there are times that it doesn't work. And if you get any sort of complex geometry, it just becomes total jank, and it can become nearly impossible to do anything in certain scenarios because of that. It's bad. But if you thought Colossus was bad enough, dear God, can we talk about Tripwire? Tripwire is a whole entire beast on her own. When I talk about ASIM games in general, or really just PvP actually, I always throw around a very specific term, and I've said this on multiple occasions. Whether it be for balancing, whether it be for pure enjoyment of a character's kit, whether it be for skill expression, this specific term is very, very vital to nearly every aspect of a character. That term is player agency, or in other words, the ability for players to control or play against a certain aspect or ability that a character's kit may have. When a player doesn't have that agency to counteract an ability through useful skill expression, generally that ability isn't good. And vice versa, if a player doesn't have the agency to maximize the potential of an ability in a skillful way, it's also not a good ability. So let's talk about Tripwire, who has both of these issues very blatantly. Tripwire was set up as a zoner executioner, the idea that you cut off certain routes or certain terrain that forces players to get funneled into favorable positions to secure eliminations. That's the easiest way to say it. So to balance this, they typically don't favor chases and need to use their abilities and their tools in a skillful manner to catch up and deal enough damage. Yet somehow, similar to Colossus, Tripwire manages to completely avoid this counterbalance whatsoever and has the best of both worlds in the most awful way possible. Tripwire's main zoning tool is a landmine, essentially, that deals moderate damage when stepped on and can last indefinitely, but it is counteracted through either generally good movement or any sort of ranged ability if you can't work around it. On their own, I think these are totally fine, actually. I think they're perfect as is. The secondary option is a laser beam that is capable of zoning survivors by dealing rapid damage in chase if you stay in the lingering static electricity on the ground. When these tools are combined, this would have been fine for Tripwire. So what's the problem? Well, okay, let's start with Tripwire's beam also dealing impact damage. Yeah, that's right, Tripwire deals impact damage. A chunk of health just gone if you get even nicked by this thing. Oh, but also Tripwire has a double jump with insane movement options and has literally 0 cooldown. Okay, but don't forget the ability to lock survivors in place with absolutely no counterplay if even one gets latched onto. Oh, and by the way, best of all, you also have a constant passive that just tracks survivors as long as they're close enough. Do you see the problem here? This is an awfully designed kit. Tripwire being a zoner and a rushdown executioner is already bad as is, but to remove so much of the player skill and agency to the point that you just take unavoidable damage is mind-boggling. It is mind-boggling. It feels like unless you are somehow lucky enough to get a cream on your team, which I pray for that cream if you do, all you can do is just delay the inevitable otherwise. Because anything impactful is just gone most times, unless the Tripwire is incompetent at the character. I'm sorry if I sound emotionally weighted with my words when I'm saying this, and obviously biased when I say this, but it's really hard to express this point in particular without expressing just how frustrating this character is. It's not even satisfying to play either. That's the other side of it. Tripwire just doesn't have gratification at all from getting kills because it's just so easy and there's absolutely no skill expression. So nothing pays off in the long run. The best that you might get is that one meme of Sonic just staring down Tripwire and the 7 mines. It's so bad. This also honestly has me worried about Fleetway when Fleetway releases later in the pipeline, because evidently Fleetway and Tripwire were too similar to the point that one had to be held until the patch later on, and judging from what we're seeing, it seriously makes me wonder if Tripwire should have been the one to be held to create a proper zoning character. But I digress. Both of these executioners were just not ready for the release of this update. Not from a bugs or glitches standpoint, because I do understand that there are bugs and glitches, but purely from a fundamental gameplay design standpoint, they were not ready. 2011X isn't a good executioner either. Let's get that on the board now. He has his fair share of problems that makes him incredibly unfun on both sides, but at least in some capacity, there is a fair balance for the way that his role as an executioner is chipping away at health and draining survivors who are playing by themselves, essentially incentivizing good teamwork and good ability usage. Neither Colossus nor Tripwire fits their roles that they have of being the brute and zoner playstyles. Instead, it feels like a jack of all trades on both characters with insane damage output and very little that the survivors can do if there's even a shred of competency behind the controller. Whether they get balance patches or full reworks, I literally don't care. These executioners need to be relooked at some point so that they fit their character more effectively. Okay, real quick, this is just kind of a speed round on a few of my other remarks. Number 1, bugs. I mentioned it. Bugs are so bad, and there are so many, and I know there's probably going to be some patched by the time I get this video out, and there's probably some due to the way Roblox is, but they are still really, really bad. You have characters completely unable to move. Tails Glide is still bugging out. Meters like Blaze or Silver that just do not replenish or display correctly. Chat being completely unusable upon loading in the game. 2011X can be completely immune to stuns after a while. Rounds that just do not start. And this is just naming a few. These bugs very quickly degrade match experience, especially if you're playing for long periods of time. I'm hoping that the rest of them get patched soon, but given that there is a lot of people who are planning to take a break from the game, who knows, honestly, who knows. The other thing I want to mention is the soundtracks. All of them are bangers. I love the composers in this game. Massive respect to the composers on the team. All of them are bangers, which isn't shocking at all, but I love every single one of the tracks. Especially the new Last Man Standing themes, I think they are phenomenal. The only request I personally have is just maybe making them a little bit louder, especially the chase themes. Sometimes I just straight up don't hear them. Otherwise though, absolute bangers, phenomenal job. Okay, cool, that's it, speed round over. I know I've complained a lot about this update, a lot, but I really do want to stress that this is far better than 0.1 ever was and ever could have dreamed to be. I do find myself having fun playing the game. It's a game I can hop on by myself, I can hop on with friends, I can quickly get into a game, and I can just play characters from a franchise that I love, in a genre that I love, a lot. There is a lot of genuine appeal to this game. But with that said, I think I'm not the only one that says that this update left a lot to be desired, and it left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. For me, though, it also brings up a lot of questions regarding the dev team that I would like answered publicly at some point. For example, who is greenlighting these gameplay kits for characters and the balancing decisions that led to these characters feeling how they do? What kind of testing went on to allow these kits and these map designs to be pushed through? What kind of values are being upheld with the map and character creation process so that we can know what is being prioritized on the dev team? Do they want quantity or quality in these updates, and can we get both? And most importantly, what kind of changes should we expect in the near future, given that many of these people are going to be going on break soon, if not already on break? All of these things are things that I want answers to, whether right now, in the near future, whenever it may be, because I think these are questions that need to be asked within the team. Things need to be straightened out before we get any more updates, and I think that the players and the team working on the game have the right to know and understand these kinds of decisions that are being made. This game needs the criticism now more than ever. Not going to the team's throats, not doing what the community has been doing where they just throw blame left, right, and center, but genuine criticism and offering solutions to some of the pain points that, similar to other games in the genre right now, are dragging the game down very quickly. I might make a video actually doing this, going over potential solutions that probably could be put in place. So if you do like this and you do want to see something like that, please let me know. But overall, this update is one that was needed for the game, and I do think that for what it is, it does do what 0.1 wish it could have done. It was something that needed to be put in the game. It needs a lot of post-launch patches and a lot of polish in order to fully realize what it should have been, which also has me worried because we don't know how long it might take to come into fruition. That's all I got. Thank you so much for listening and watching. If you, again, want me to make that video going over potential solutions like I've done with some of the previous videos I've done in the past, please let me know. Please, tell people, get those discussions going. Like I said, I'm not big on the like, subscribe stuff, but biggest thing is just please talk about this stuff. Please make this aware to the developers on the team, or anyone on the team for that matter, so that we can make the game the best that we can make it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.